I need to talk about 4 or 5 things broadly when we think about cities and finance. I think before we get into this mechanics of financing intervention in cities, we need to also recognize that what has been the city-centric agenda over the last 30, 40 years. And that kind of gives some sense of how global, national, regional forces are shaping outcomes in our cities. And that also gives us a sense of where we are heading. So if we look at the pre-2005 era, largely it was catch-up. So we have a lot of pockets in our cities that are not hygienic, popularly known as slums or informal settlements. Some were formalized, but still they were grappling with basic services. And because labor input was coming from a lot of these hotspots, the focus was, and it was also leading to lack of investments into the country. So the idea was that, okay, let's not create hotspots of like a major disease outbreak, and let's kind of focus on improving or capitalizing on productivity of labor, because the production systems at that time in the 90s, etc., were not very technocentric as we have now, but they were very labor intensive. So the idea was that, okay, let's clean up these cities. And when we were talking about cities, we were consciously and unconsciously talking about the bigger cities. These were Calcuttas and Bombays and Delhis of the country. I think around 2005, the narrative also changed a bit, and the narrative was that there was a massive exercise that kind of looked at counting the economic output from cities, and it was largely recognized that cities are what's going to drive economic output in the country, and therefore we need to be careful about our cities. We need to think very carefully about our cities and make our cities these hot spots of productive activity. And that kind of leads us into this first major intervention between 2005 and 2014, where the focus is on larger cities, so or the state capital. So the idea is, okay, let's look at transportation system, let's look at water systems, let's look at sanitation systems. So that's that one period. And of course we made some progress. That progress was not very uniform across the country, and we faced a lot of challenges, but we learned quite a bit. But I think one of the important lessons from that period, there were two or three lessons I would summarize. Three lessons that emerged from that period were like this. First, I think we learned that there has to be some amount or some kind of an economic foundation or base on which we can plan improvements in our city. So there has to be some mechanism through which incremental money, we are able to generate incremental money, and that flows back through into the city through various routes. And I think, and if we look at the structure of that phase between 2005 and 2014, we realized that during that period, we saw that all the cities had to make a plan. And that plan was not a static plan. over 1 year or 2 years. It was a long-term plan. And cities were asked to think about the future, think about what needs to be done to make those places vibrant, both in terms of productive activity as well as in terms of living conditions. The second lesson which we learned from that phase was we need to decentralize. I think there's no point in controlling the mechanics of intervention from right up, but basically let cities decide what their future is, let them carefully plan and think about their future, and the money should help facilitate those kinds of imagination. So that was the second important learning. And the third important learning was that there has to be some kind of a shared ownership of what we are trying to do. So, and that kind of brings in the politics of development into the picture. So there's some sense of accountability on bureaucracy as well as in political leadership. Some money flowed, but that was also the time and period when we experimented a lot with bringing in the private sector. So many of you might have read about this term, public-private partnerships. So a lot of public-private partnership endeavors were kind of operationalized, some of which didn't work, some of which worked, but that was also a defining phase. And a lot of it was infrastructure catching up. So there was a lot of deficit. Services were not up to the mark. Service level benchmarks were not achieved. But it was also a vehicle to operationalize one of the first major shifts in urban policy that happened in India. For example, the National Urban Transport Policy was operationalized around the same time, which laid a lot of emphasis on creating public transport systems. And therefore, when that was announced, money was facilitated through this big initiative. So there was some amount of convergence. And I think broadly it was recognized that cities are going to drive economic output, as I said earlier, and let us first begin to focus on these bigger cities, make them as a kind of a learning hotspot, and then the experience that we gain, we take it to other places in the country. And so it was a mixed bag. It was not at all very bad. I think we were able to do some good things, particularly around public transport and water. But I think that led us to the second phase, which is the last decade between 2014 2024. And one of the things that and there were many good things in this period, and of course people can debate and discuss. But I would talk about 3 or 4 things that I feel have been a little better. One is that we've tried to expand coverage, and I think that's a good thing. So if we look at India's flagship infrastructure upgradation program at the present moment, it's covering 500 cities compared to around 65 in the earlier phase. So that was one good thing. There was split ownership, so all the 3 tiers of government were made to financially contribute, and I think there was political embeddedness, which was quite smart, I think. Third, I think the way it was designed in terms of programming, there was some amount of convergence and some amount of thinking, careful thinking. So, for example, if we have an infrastructure upgradation program, We also need a housing program. We also need a dedicated sanitation program, because we don't want people to think about toilet construction, and while toilet construction happens as one part of the program, sewerage system and its upgradation happens from the other part of the program, from the other program. And then there was a wave of digitalization, so a lot of these programs were built on the foundation of digital architecture, which I believe was important, because we had a lot of human capital available and efficiency was an important concern. And third was sequencing. I think it was planned in such a manner that we sequence intervention and not kind of lock ourselves into things that we are not able to undo. And finally, I think which is still debatable, and we'll see, technology started playing an important role, and technology-centric interventions were considered to be were prioritized and also given some special attention, and of course with the objective of monitoring as well as improving efficiencies. So this is where we are at the present moment. Now, if you look at this entire history of the last 19 odd years, we need to understand some basic things. There is the 74th Constitutional Amendment, and that 74th Constitutional Amendment creates urban as the third tier of government. And the promise of the 74th Constitutional Amendment has been that funds, functions and functionaries, all three will be devolved. So it was built on the foundations of decentralization. So we need to recognize that. But at the same time, while money was made available through programmatic interventions, it's important to recognize and underscore the fact that we need to think about cities that are able to raise their own financial resources, are able to make investments back into the city, as well as ensure that infrastructure that is installed in the city is performing to its efficient levels. And therefore, if we look at this pot and we look at the financing streams, we have 5 broad buckets here, which is allowing money to flow into cities. So we have the municipal finance structure, where we have own tax and own non-tax revenues, and of course there are expenditures which are on the revenue account, not on the capital. So you're not creating assets. So for capital account, you'll have to either take some loan from a multilateral or a bilateral agency, or tap into the markets, tap into the bond markets or commercial market, etc. So that's a separate matter. So we have this revenue account where the focus is that cities should be able to raise own resources so that they have enough liquidity in the system to be able to invest back. So that is the first stream. The second stream is infrastructure finance. So a lot of trunk infrastructure that comes up in cities, for example metros, for example trunk water pipeline, etc. Most of it is financed through complex parastatal or a regional body. So for which, for example, over so many years, Government of India has created this facility of state development banks. So we have these urban infrastructure development corporations which are present in every state, and they kind of get capitalized through the state system or the central system, and they also are able to access money from outside of their jurisdiction. So they can access the capital market or they can access the bond market, etc., because the state is basically underwriting, providing sovereign guarantees to those investments. So that money doesn't largely come to cities or city administration. That largely sits around a separate structure. But the infrastructure that gets created is basically serving people in the city. So there is some amount of coherence, and the problem is that there are many moving parts. So careful thinking of around services that are being delivered by the city administration and services that are being provided by the trunk infrastructure. Sometimes in the way things are planned, there is some disjointedness, and that kind of affects efficiency. So this is this one pot of money. The third pot of money that comes is through development finance. Now, development finance essentially by design is basically looking at social infrastructure, looking at employment programs, looking at livelihood programs. Sometimes it sits within the state, the administration comes to the city, sometimes it is devolved to the city, but that's one pot of money that comes. Then there is climate finance. Now climate finance is a new emerging stream of income and source of income and money for cities. But we don't have carefully designed projects that's able to attract much of the climate finance that is flowing around the world. And a lot of climate finance is therefore directed towards private enterprises. So private enterprises are able to tap into either the carbon market or directly are able to access climate finance. Of course, the benefits accrue to residents and people living in the cities. And final stream is disaster financing. So the government has a system through which money is made available for cities, because many cities are located in hazard-prone areas. They are prone to disasters, and the infrastructure gets damaged. So there is a pot of money available both for rebuilding as well as for mitigating risks, so that present investments in infrastructure are protected in the future, even if the event happens again. So broadly, this is the architecture. Now, amongst this entire suite of options, the one that has gained the most attention is municipal finance. And now, the state of the matter is, and if we look at the urban programs in the present times, the structure of urban program is that some part of money from local government, the city government, has to feed into those programmatic interventions. Now the problem is that we have been systematically over the last 4 years looking at municipal finance data, and we have found that it's not a healthy situation. And there are 3 or 4 broad characteristics of, in fact, a little more than 3, 4, but maybe 5. But let me remember some of these and talk about these. First is that the situation is neither very good and rosy on the revenue side, neither it is good and rosy on the expenditure side. So on the revenue side, there are the elements of concern are like this. First, property tax is an important source of income for city governments, but it is a very healthy source of income for big cities, but smaller and medium-sized cities are not able to leverage it, because there are many factors responsible for improving buoyancy in property tax, which is a work in progress. Digitalization is helping us in some manner, but there's some improvement, but there's a long road ahead. Second is that on the non-tax revenue source, which is particularly user charges, we have not been able to recover economic cost of provisioning of those services. And reasons have been many. In some cases, some argue that political reasons don't allow market rates for a service like water provisioning. So there have been challenges around that, and therefore that money is not coming quite significantly to the city government. And third is that because we have not been able to clean up the land records in the urban areas, rural land records are very proper. There are challenges around mutation and also leveraging land for or monetizing land for additional benefits. So neither we are able to incrementally capture land value, incrementally capture value from land by allocating it for a particular use, nor we are able to systematically monetize. Digitalization, of course, is helping us. On the expenditure side, we have two big challenges. First is we have a bloated local infrastructure. So we are spending a lot on establishment and administrative expenses. So a lot of it is going into salaries. So there needs to be some kind of rationalization to reduce that. If I look at an average number around Indian cities, we are in the range of 50 to 60% on the expenditure side in terms of admin and salaries. And finally, operation and maintenance. We have not been able to spend adequately on maintaining the infrastructure which is in place, and therefore we all the time hear stories about a pipe broken here and there, sewerage system not performing appropriately, etc. So these are the challenges on the municipal side, and a lot of effort has been made towards improving this. And I have talked about the other streams of income. So now we arrive at this point that okay, we know what the situation is like, and we know what the challenges are looking like. How do we move from here, and what is the blueprint that we can talk about and think through? There are a few things that I'd like to you all to reflect on, and there are no ready-made answers. One of the things that happened post 2014 and over the last 10 years, it is reasonably recognized that a lot of our effort has to be directed towards improving efficiency of production in our cities. So water has to be efficiently managed. Sewerage systems have to be efficiently managed. At the same time, there has been a renewed focus, although it was earlier there as well, but there is this renewed push and focus towards improving livability in cities. So we have to enhance the quality of life of city residents. So, but at the back of it, I think we all recognize that what sits at the back of these ideas and these objectives is that cities need to attract money, and in order to be able to attract money, they have to be efficient. They have to be efficient on the production side, on the provisioning side. And they have to make resources available, for example, water, electricity and other things, so that there are investments in cities. People flock to cities to whosoever has the human capital and skill flock to cities and basically try and improve their life. So that's so we know that there is an economic agenda sitting behind all of this, and therefore it becomes clear that all of this converges somewhere and it is moving in some direction. Now, at this moment in 2024, there are a few realizations that we need to be aware of. I think this realization is very important and recognizable for all of us, which is the climate movement. So we are facing uh, a challenge of immense proportion, and we need to respond to that challenge. And what does that climate movement do? And that is what we need to recognize, and that's the blueprint that I'm talking about. Now, at at one extreme, we need to keep improving the systems within the city and beyond to be able to make our money systems more buoyant and more elastic, and be this space where you are able to generate more resources, attract more resources, etc. So there's this 101 story that we have to keep doing, which means that we have to keep looking at expenditure efficiency, and we have to keep looking at revenue efficiency. But on the other side, we have to also recognize a moment which is being provided by a moment that is being made recognized by the climate crisis. And what does that moment do? Now, that moment tells us very clearly that we not only need to talk about economic cities or functioning cities or livable cities, but we need to talk about climate resilient cities. Now, what does that mean? So we need to think about three things here. So first bucket is that if you're thinking about creating climate resilient cities, we have to first think about adapting to risks. So we need to understand what are the key risks that the city is facing, and we need to adapt appropriately, both proactively, but also ensuring that the physical infrastructure is protected. So that's like one big bucket. The second big bucket is about we need to decarbonize. So what does it mean? So it means that we need to think carefully about our infrastructure to avoid long-term carbon lock-ins. For example, we can't put in a power plant in the city center which is driven by fossil fuel, or we can't be running our metro rail systems which is on fossil fuels. It has to be on clean electricity. So that's the mitigation story. And the third story is about development. So while we adapt, while we mitigate, we also need to ensure that our development goals are adhered to. So what are those? We have to ensure that there is no poverty. We have to ensure that there is sufficient employment. We have to ensure that inequality is manageable. We have to also ensure that food is available. There is gender equality. So all those development goals that we have all subscribed to or signed up to have to also be in that same bucket. Now, what does it mean? It means that our infrastructure and our city systems that are going to come now and into the future have to has to necessarily recognize the climate reality, and therefore put in the infrastructure and the services flowing through that infrastructure, having recognized this reality, has to be of a certain kind, of a certain structure. For example, if we look at what needs to transform in the present, at this moment of climate resilient development, we are talking about 5 systems that needs to transform: energy system, urban and infrastructure system, land and ecosystems, industrial, and societal. So there are these transitions. First, transitions have to happen, which means that they have to move from an earlier state to another state which is climate resilient, climate aligned, and then they have to transform, which means that they have to keep improving on efficiency, and that's where the societal transition comes into play. So how does all of this play out into the city system? So if I look at one by one the city systems and try and merge that with the system transitions that I was talking about. So if you look at energy system, so that is largely aligned to EV and renewable energy. If you are looking at land and ecosystem, it's about nature-based solutions. It's about managing our land better. It's about green cover. It's about afforestation. When we look about urban and infrastructure, it's about water. It's about planning, urban planning. It's about sustainable land use management. And if I talk about industry, it's about certain kinds of fuel use and certain kinds of industrial processes which are cleaner. And when we are talking about societal transitions, we are talking about behavior change. And when we're talking about behavior change, a certain kind of food consumption, certain kind of mobility choices, certain kind of consumption patterns, low carbon consumption patterns. So those are societal transitions. And they need to first transition and then they need to transform. And I think, and you would appreciate the fact that when I was narrating all these with examples, it gives a completely different picture about a city. It gives a different kind of infrastructure imagination. And that infrastructure imagination for which groundwork was done over the last 19 years has to be accelerated and has to not get delayed. It has to be proactively launched. And what it will do, it will open up many kind of input streams, and all those input streams will help us improve liquidity in the city system, make the city system more agile and responsive to the crisis that we are dealing, and move towards a sustainable pathway. So this needs to be carefully crafted. So what we have been doing over the 19 years have to be embedded within the structural frame, and then to be thought about, or then we need to think about how these structural frames have to be connected with financing and financing structures, and then how financing structures and this kind of an structural frame could be leveraged in creating something which delivers on development, which kind of delivers on the promise of, or basically leverages the moment of structural transformation that we are witnessing. So this is where we are headed, and this is perhaps little to sink in. We need to think very carefully and creatively about our cities and about how we can leverage this moment to create some kind of tangible pathways that helps us to move in the right direction. So in terms of wrapping up, let me check how much time I have. I'll quickly run through some slides which kind of summarizes all what, since I have done some legwork, I should be able to run through this. So I hope everyone is able to see this, but let me just use this to summarize what I was talking about. One of the things that I have been sparingly talking about is this idea of service delivery, and service delivery is very closely linked to welfare delivery, and welfare delivery requires local politics to be very, very strong. So there has to be some kind of a social demand that needs to be developed, so that there is a virtuous cycle that gets created through for infrastructure and infrastructure provisioning, and which kind of brings in more capital and more money into the city system. The second is that I think we need to recognize the fact that our cities are not homogeneous. So there's a lot of heterogeneity among cities and within cities, and we need not necessarily hop on to a bandwagon and offer a uniform solution. we have to create bottom-up responses. And third is that I think there has to be a very strong emphasis on an risk-informed economic development plan, which anchors around employment, which is the structural transformation opportunity, and these need to converge with climate and disaster resilience goals. And this was what the climate resilient development blueprint as an opportunity looks like, offers to us. I'll skip this. This is the climate resilient development pathway that I was talking about. So you can see that we have a choice where we achieve low emissions, but we also deliver on equity and SDG, and we have a choice where we are entering into a territory of increasing risk. But what is essential here is that we need to ensure that a lot of these things, for example, good governance, recognizing diverse knowledges and values, ecosystem stewardship, synergies across multiple goals, and societal transitions become the underpinning that kind of supports this. This is something that I talked about, that when we think about interventions at the local level, we need to be mindful of the fact that we are looking at 4 agendas, and we need to converge that. And we need to ensure that development, climate, and disaster risk converge. And this is a humongous task. It is not so easy. We have to think carefully about present infrastructure. We have to think carefully about future infrastructure, and try and develop this synergistic frame, which is still work in progress. And this slide I wanted to show to challenge all of you that look, and kind of support my argument earlier that we are looking at cities which are getting heated up. And if we look at this diagram, which is from the IPCC, we clearly know that density and layout and heat from human activities and heat retaining properties of buildings is elevating our temperatures, have a local effect on temperature. But at the same time, water and vegetation, the blue-green infrastructure in city helps us reduce local effects on temperature. So therefore, the point that I was making earlier, that these new realities on the climate science, on climate risk, will help us, or basically force us to think about a different kind of infrastructure provisioning in cities, and we need to be prepped for it. We need to have money for it, but we need to also operationalize it, and using that, think of multiple goals that we are targeting. I talked about this, and yeah. So I'll stop here. I'm glad that I did this. I hope that this was useful. Keep reading. This is a very important area that needs a lot of young people, because we need a lot of creativity, a lot of careful thinking, unpacking, and a lot of ground-up evidence, and a lot of trials. A lot of this is being offered in the Urban Fellows program, and people who are eligible and people who are interested should apply. Thank you very much for your time.